Good morning. If you watch, you know I talk about issues related to true crime and the true crime community, but I don't really cover actual cases. That said, I've always been open to lending some exposure if I can, amplifying anything that needs help getting out there to the best of my ability. I thought maybe some missing persons cases that ideally within 48 hours I'd be able to pin that the person had been found. But a friend brought this case to my attention, and I think it's an important one. It's over 20 years old. For more than 2 decades, this family has been fighting for answers. There are 4 people missing and 2 vulnerable adults in a potentially very dangerous situation right now. So let's talk about the Anderson family. Lesley entered into the marriage with 3 children, Chris, Stephanie, and Greg. Stephanie and Greg both were dealing with some kind of mental disability or developmental issue. I haven't been able to find out the exact situation there. Jeff adopted them, and Lesley and Jeff went on to have 3 more children, Rachel, Cameron, and Kyle. They tried to make it work. Marriage is hard, life is hard, and by 1997, they had divorced. Jeff moved to Indiana, and Chris, the eldest child, was off on his own, leaving Lesley with 5 children. Lesley was probably at a low point. She'd been through a divorce, and she was struggling to take care of 5 children. She was broke, and a man came into her life. There's not much information available about him publicly. He's usually referred to as either the roommate or the family friend. Lesley's sister reportedly said that she had been in a secret relationship with this man, that he was the boyfriend, and that Lesley was at least in love with him. So she was in a vulnerable position, and he invited her to come live with her children on his property. Unfortunately, it turned out that the property was a series of pretty dilapidated trailers and a fairly unlivable environment. But she was stuck by that point. So Jeff was in Indiana, and Lesley and the children were in Mississippi. And he did get regular phone calls with the kids, but they became less and less frequent, with the roommate answering and telling him that they were unavailable. After a while, the roommate told him that Lesley had taken off with a truck driver. She had taken his children, Rachel, Cameron, and Kyle, with her, and had abandoned the other 2, leaving Stephanie and Greg in the custody of the roommate. Jeff contacted police in Mississippi, but they were fairly dismissive. They refused to file a missing persons report and considered it a custodial issue, a parental abduction. The Indiana police were a little more helpful, but there's only so much they could do. At least they did get the missing persons reports filed. It's really important that families have the support of police, that they know the police are on their side, trying to figure out what happened. And it can be an additional trauma when the police react this way. I am going to include the phone number for the sheriff's department should anyone be interested in politely encouraging more investigation of this case. By summer, Lesley had violated the custody arrangement by not showing up for visitation for Jeff. And then she didn't show up for court, and a warrant was issued for her arrest. Still no missing person report filed on her, but a warrant was issued. Since Lesley, who was missing, didn't comply with the custody arrangement, Jeff got full custody of his 3 missing children, and that enabled him to get access to their school records. This is where we get the only real concrete date in this whole thing. It looks like the last time anyone in the family saw them was December of 1999. But the school records show that Rachel was last in class on April 5th of 2000. Cameron was last in school on April 7th and Kyle on April 10th. I'm not really sure what the staggered disappearances mean. Honestly, the Vallow case is the first thing to come to mind. My leaning on this whole thing is that it does not have a happy ending, but there's always room for at least a thread of hope. I'd like to think that they're out there. The odds just seem against it. It's hard to believe that this mom would abandon 3 of her children and take off with the other 3 and never make any kind of contact, never reach out again. Or that these children, who were 9, 12, and 13 at the time of their disappearance, would never reach out to their siblings or their father. This isn't an infant that wouldn't remember their dad. These kids were old enough to know phone numbers and addresses. Their memories were set. They knew who they were taken away from when they left, whatever happened to them. They should have reached out by now if they were able. The other part of this case is possibly even more pressing. Stephanie and Greg. Jeff had reached out to them at one point, and his stories are disturbing. They appear to be living in substandard conditions. They are very fearful in their body language and in behavior, especially when the roommate is around. And Jeff claims that the roommate in front of him told Greg and Stephanie that Jeff would kill them if they went with him. And there is someone who says that they are Chris, the oldest son, and he alleges that the roommate told Stephanie and Greg that Chris is an alcoholic, drug user, and a danger to them. So this man is keeping these 2 vulnerable adults isolated and terrified. Apparently, the police will not intercede with Stephanie and Greg because they are adults. Reportedly, Stephanie and Greg are both receiving Social Security benefits. I think that could really be the key. Sometimes cops don't care, and the government can be a giant machine that doesn't give a damn about human beings, but they care about money. And I think if this were looked at through the angle of Social Security fraud, they might be able to investigate further and find out how they became in this man's custody. If the stories are true, then these 2 are being abused. They're being kept isolated. They are afraid of the very people most likely to help them and support them. They're being lied to. They're being kept in substandard housing conditions, and someone is cashing their checks every month. I think it's really worth finding out how they ended up in the custody of the roommate, and why he's keeping them so isolated. You know, is he keeping them for their checks? Is he keeping them because they know something about what happened to their mother and their siblings? Maybe a combination. Right now, these are just allegations from people personally involved in the case. But I think it's very much worth investigating. And we need to know, because if they are right at this moment living in fear, there's something that can be done about it. I really think if we can get Stephanie and Greg separated from the roommate, if we can get them into secure, safe, healthy accommodations, maybe get them a little bit of therapy, we might find out what happened 23 years ago to their family members. So what we know is that Lesley Rachel, Cameron, and Kyle have not been seen since the year 2000. And that's really it. The lack of police investigation is painful. A lot has been made of her car being photographed on the roommate's property after she disappeared. I don't know that it's such a bombshell. With the story that she left with a trucker, maybe she went with the truck and she didn't need her car. I mean, his story is obviously bullshit, but it certainly would have been nice if police had investigated and taken the car, but I don't believe that happened. There are rumors of a storm shelter or bomb shelter being built on the property, and even after 20 years, police still haven't searched the property for anything, any clues as to what happened to these people. The roommate changed his story from she ran off with a trucker and her 3 kids to she just took her 3 kids off to Mexico. And there's a weird, convoluted, wannabe spy communication story along with that. But that was proven untrue. So if it was a police investigator who did this interview, then they know for certain that this man's story has changed and that he lied. But I haven't heard of any further progress. So that's it. Very little information, no evidence, no crime scene, not even a set date of when they disappeared. So Lesley was never reported missing, and there is not a NAMUS profile on her. According to the NAMUS profiles, all 3 children are described as having blonde hair and blue eyes. Rachel was 13 at the time of her disappearance, and she would now be 36. There's a notation that she had a strawberry birthmark on the left side of her face. Cameron was 12 at the time and would now be 35. The only notation on his file is that he wore glasses, which may or may not be the case today. And Kyle, who was only 9 when he disappeared, would now be 32. And it's noted that he had a scar on his lip. I'm gonna post all the information, and I hope you'll take a look at it. If you know anything, please come forward. I imagine the locals know exactly who the roommate is, so you might know something about his past relationships or his temperament or anything strange about current spending habits. There's no way of knowing what is going to break a case open, and it's often something very small and surprising. Things you might not expect would break a case. So anything, please speak up if you know something. And please keep an eye out. I'm gonna put their pictures in here just on the off chance that they're out there somewhere. Rachel, Cameron, and Kyle would all be in their 30s now, maybe with families of their own. It's a nice thought. So keep an eye out. If you are in the Fulton, Mississippi area, please dedicate your thoughts to Stephanie and Greg. And let's not forget about Lesley in all of this. I know she gets a little overshadowed by the children, but we don't know what this woman went through or what she may have done to try to protect her family. Please check out the Missing Anderson Family Facebook page. It's run, I believe, by Jeff's sister, and I think Chris has some interaction with it. I'm not exactly sure, but it's family run, and they're working really hard. So stay safe and listen to your instincts, and put some positive juju out there for this family. Been through a lot. I'll see you soon. Bye.